Lunch is served. That's the lunch bell. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Boone. I am the president-elect of City Club of Central Oregon. Thanks for being here today. Did you notice coming in today, by the way, I just have to say at the start, tree experts doing this defensible space clearing. That was not set up for today's topic, but nice to see. Thanks for giving them space as you pull out this afternoon. I'd like to take a moment to ask all of our board and committee members who are in the room to please stand up. It's because of these folks. Please rise. Yay. And I see even some past board members in the room. I'm going to go off script. Dawn Stevens, Eli Ashley, past City Club board members, please stand up. Barb Hess. Yeah, there they are. Stephen. Sort of our alums. We can't get it done without our board and committee members who do everything from event planning to cleanup, et cetera. So really appreciate all the service that those folks give us. And this month we want to thank all of our sponsors and community partners. I'm going to read a list here. Let's save our applause until the end. ASI Wealth Management, City of Bend, the Desert Pine Group at Morgan Stanley, OSU Cascades, St. Charles Health System, Central Oregon Association of Realtors, Brooks Resources, Central Oregon Community College, Bend Park and Recreation District, Visit Bend, Kittleson Associates, Miller Lumber, Abbott Butte Contracting, Stephen Hacker, the Lucier Center, and the Marsh McLennan Agency. Now we can applaud. Also, like our volunteers, sponsors are critical to keeping City Club moving, so thanks to all of our sponsors. If you have interest in being a sponsor, more questions, our executive director, Kim, is in the back, or you can talk to me or any of our board members today. Thank you. Finally, any of our elected officials that are in the room or running for office, please stand. I know I saw Councilor Broadman. Are there others? Jody's here too. Thank you. Bill Kuhn, thank you. Bill always catches you off guard, right? Elected officials. Thank you all for your service. We're honored today to have Jaca Neujahr as our moderator. Jaca is the Public Affairs Officer at the Oregon Department of Forestry, supporting ODF's wildfire suppression, prevention, and mitigation communication needs. Prior to moving to Oregon, Jaca grew up in a small town in Central Florida and graduated from the University of South Florida with a bachelor's degree in mass communications. After college, Jaca worked for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission as a communications specialist, which ignited, pun intended, her love of working in the natural resources sector. Please help me enjoy and welcoming Jaca.
Is it afternoon? Morning? Can't quite recall. Hi, everybody. I am Jaca Neujahr. Like it was said, I am a public affairs officer at the Oregon Department of Forestry, primarily working in wildfire communications and kind of all aspects of the word. Before we get started in our panel today, I just wanted to go over a few terms that we might hear come up in the discussion, so that way we're kind of all apprised of what we're talking about when we have this fire lingo that can be real confusing sometimes. So as you can see on the slide here, this just goes over the different types of incidents that we normally see in fire. The first one I'm going to go over is a type 3 incident. This is for ODF, probably the most common type of incident. This incident usually extends into multiple operational periods, and it requires numerous kinds of resources and personnel to come and assist in it. After that, we have, and I will correct this in a second for my federal people because I know it's changed a little bit. After that, we have a type 2 incident, which extends beyond the capabilities for local control and is expected to go into multiple operational periods and may require the response of resources outside of an area, including regional or national resources, to effectively manage operations, command, and general staffing. The next is a type 1 incident, which is the most complex, requiring national resources for safe and effective management and operation. I know on the federal level this has changed a little bit. They have changed it to where basically the type 1 and type 2 incident types have been combined to create a complex incident rather than type 1, type 2. So now it's a complex incident and a type 3 incident. So next slide. There we go. The next one is what is an incident management team? This is a group of ICS qualified personnel that consists of an incident commander, command and general staff, and then personnel assigned to other key ICS positions. And I will shift my speaking and try to refrain from acronyms. ICS is the Incident Command System for anybody who is unaware. What they do is they're mobilized during a complex incident to help provide a command and control infrastructure to manage all elements associated with complex incidents. And they're usually brought in when a fire gets too large for the local teams to handle alongside with other fires that are potentially happening in the district. So if a large fire happens and there's still other small fires happening, they'll bring in an IMT to help manage the large fires so that they can put their focus back onto the small fires happening in said district. Next slide, please. Containment is a weird phrase because it kind of changes depending on who you're talking to. So this is my version of containment, and it might change depending on whoever the fire manager is at a fire. But for us, containment indicates how much of the fire perimeter has been surrounded by a control line that the fire will not progress across. Rather than describing how much the entire fire has been put out, containment refers solely to the perimeter itself and its potential growth. And a control line is basically like a fire line that is put in to stop the forward progression of a fire, and it wraps around the entire perimeter to keep it in that space. And that goes into the fire line, a line dug around the fire to break up vegetation and prevent further spread. And then mop up, which is probably a term that you hear a lot as a fire goes on. They'll say like, okay, we're in mop up operations. That's basically the control line has been put around, it's in this space, and now our firefighters are going in and extinguishing and removing any extra burning material or hot spots to help reduce the chance of it reigniting later on. Next slide, please. This just goes into the different resources you might see on a fire. Aircraft can vary from helicopters to fixed-wing aircrafts, single engine, air tankers, and then we have a multi-mission aircraft, which is mostly used for early detection, along with, we'll have it be kind of our eyes in the sky to help give boots on the ground some situational awareness. And then dozers, any steel-tracked vehicle equipped with front-mounted blade used for exposing mineral soil. In situations like a dozer, it's very helpful. Most of the time, we'll go to a landowner and they'll already have it, and they might have already put in a line with a dozer, which is very helpful. And then an engine. There are 7 ground engine types, and the most commonly used engine in wildland firefighting is a Type 5 engine. And those can hold anywhere between 2 to 4 people and hold about 400 gallons of water. These are just a couple of extra resources for anybody who's interested in learning more. The National Interagency Fire Center, National Wildfire Coordinating Group, Incident Response Pocket Guide, which is an IRPG for the acronyms, and then the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. Just to go off a little bit, the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center, for anybody who's looking for statewide statistics that are non-jurisdictional, they just go by the state of Oregon. I recommend reaching out to them. They're very helpful. They collect data from every agency that deals with fire in that situation. With that, I will move us along. I would like to now introduce our panelists, who will please join me on the stage as I call you. Kevin Moriarty has over 25 years of experience in fire and fuel management, working for the USDA Forest Service, National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, and the Bureau of Land Management. He is currently the county forester. Kevin holds a master's degree in forest sciences with an emphasis in fire behavior from Colorado State University and a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Oregon. Trey Leonard is the fire management officer for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs Fire Management in Oregon, with 18 years in this role. He began fighting fires in 1988 and has held various positions, including heli-tac crew member, engine director, and the assistant fire management officer operation. Trey holds a fire management certificate from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He is inspired daily by his family and enjoys coaching girls basketball at Madras High School. James Osborne is the fire management officer for the Bureau of Land Management's Prineville district and a fire chief for the Central Oregon Fire Management Service. He started his wildland fire career in the late 90s in Arizona and moved to Central Oregon in 2009. James has held numerous roles, including superintendent of the Prineville Interagency Hotshot Crew and fire management officer slash COFMIS, which is the Central Oregon Fire Management System, fire staff officer. He enjoys the complexity of the area and the recreational activities it offers, especially chukar hunting. I probably got that wrong because I've never hunted them, with his bird dog Fitz. Shawn Jaca's career has been primarily in southern Utah with the Arizona Strip BLM, and he recently became the Central Oregon Fire Management Service Fire Staff Officer. He is a primary operations section chief for one of the Northwest Incident Management teams. Shawn has 2 children and enjoys outdoor activities such as triathlons, hiking, and skiing. He balances his professional life with raising his kids and supporting their sports activities. So, gentlemen, will you please join me up here? All right. So to open us up, can we please start with a couple of examples of wildfire starts and how each would have been or were approached in the past? Similar to? Sorry, I'll start over. Can you give us a couple examples of wildfire starts and how each would be approached? So from past wildfire starts, any past fires that might come to mind, and how they were handled in that moment.
Can we talk about the 2 bulls? Okay, I guess I'll go first. Good afternoon, everybody. I lost the coin toss, I guess. Folks remember two bulls incident, west side of Bend, 10 years ago, anniversary, right? So I'll say Central Oregon's fairly unique in terms of the cooperation that happens. These fine gentlemen up here on the stage, this isn't our first time meeting each other. We worked with Jaca a ton, although we haven't met her in person, so today's great. But that being said, we manage fire in Central Oregon as the closest resource concept. We have one dispatch center that's in Redmond, and so the calls come into that center and then get dispatched out for our closest resources to respond. So that could be state, it could be federal, and we work hand in hand, and that dispatch center manages that area holistically together. And so doesn't matter the jurisdiction, the closest engine launches towards that start, and we start coordinating together depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the fire size. So if it's something smaller than what Jaca had mentioned in terms of our type 1, type 2, type 3, there are also 2 other typings, a type 4 and a type 5, which type 4 and type 5s are the fires that you all don't hear about. Roughly, I think the percentage is somewhere 97, 98% of the fires get caught, and you folks don't hear about those. It's that 3 to 1% that make the news, that are those catastrophic incidents that bring in those incident management teams, et cetera. And so we work really closely together here to manage those smaller fires. And then generally when we do have a large fire on the landscape, we coordinate with our agency administrators, our fire management staff, with resources, response, et cetera, in terms of how we're going to deal with that fire. So it's a fairly unique area. Generally, jurisdictions don't overlap or collide, if you will. Central Oregon is very much checkerboarded with land ownership, and so we realized numerous years ago, 20 plus, that we had to work together, had to do the closest forces concept to be successful here in Central Oregon, just with that response. We don't want fire engines driving past each other in Central Oregon, and in other parts of the country that does happen based on jurisdiction. So pretty unique opportunity here for folks to work together, and we do work together hand in hand. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, fellas.
I guess, good afternoon, everybody. Shawn Jaca. I'm here with Central Oregon Fire Management Service. I'll just tag on to James. Really, when it comes down to resource management is we can't do it alone. And so it really is that partnership. And that partnership from, the fire suppression, the partnership in fuels management, and the partnership in just really working together cohesively to ensure that, we're looking strategically at lessening the amount of wildfire on the landscape when it comes to human-caused starts, and making sure that we're all working together with you all to ensure that we can provide a safe community for the rest of us here in Central Oregon.
Yeah, Trey, Leonard, thank you for inviting me here. But I think one of our goals, as all of us sit up here, is for you guys not to recognize who we work for, right? And I work for the Confederated Tribes. So what we don't want to do is we want to see everybody in the same color. And luckily that's Oregon Ducks colors, green and yellow. But we just want the public to see that there is firefighters there and responding. And there's a lot of things that are done behind closed doors, and me and Shawn were talking on the way up as far as agreements and stuff like that we deal with at our level, so our firefighters don't have to see that, right? So they can come to work and just do their job and respond and be able to do what they do best, right? And so we deal with that business rules, administrative side of it, and and outside of that too is I think we need to talk about the rural fire districts too, who help us out quite a bit, right? So when we have unified command, or we're assisting Bend Fire, Redmond Fire, Jefferson County, the fire department in Warren Springs, I think that's very important to understand too, is that we do a lot of cross training with everybody, and I think that's very important for you guys to understand. So there's great partnerships and relationships from that perspective too.
Thank you, everybody. So the first question is, what factors go into the decision on how to approach or a plan to fight a fire? Is it? I'll give you hints. Life, safety?
Yeah, so really, we get direction from, our leadership, but really it comes down to is ensuring that we provide for our firefighter safety, and the safety of the general public is number one. We do our best to ensure that through our risk management processes and decisions that are being made out there, to ensure that we're putting ourselves in a situation to where we're going to protect those values at risk associated with that fire. And we look at how we're doing it with our firefighter, but also how are we doing it to ensure that there's the safety of the general public as well.
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, I think between any of the agencies here, as well as our fire department partners like like Trey had mentioned, you know, it's life, property, and then resource. So, you know, we're obviously land managers up here, but it still falls in that same form and fashion when we respond to incidents. I had another thought, but I think I might have just lost it. Oh, yeah, sorry. Squirrel, right? In terms of how we manage fire or look at fire on the landscape, it really is similar to a city, right? There's different zoning in cities, right? You have business zoning, residential, et cetera, et cetera. And so our land management plans speak to a similar fashion of that. So you have wilderness area, you have general forest, and things of that nature. So there's different land allocations out there on the landscape, and that allows us to either manage fires or not manage fires, and really is our guiding policy in terms of how we operate. Similar if you were in a city government working through your zoning and your rules that govern the city. And so generally folks don't really understand that because you think it's just Forest Service ground, BLM ground, Confederated Tribes ground, but each and every one of those land management entities has governing policy that directs us on where we can and what we can do, which gauges our response as well. And so, you know, with that, we locally have what we call a run card, which is a pre-identified response in terms of how many engines or how many resources launched towards a particular incident or a fire. And those bump up through the summer months in terms of our adjective rating or our smoky arm, if you will, for layman's terms, in terms of if it's low, it's generally you know, a one-engine response. And once you get up to extreme, that's multiple engines, multiple resources rolling towards those incidents on the front end. And those run cards are all run through dispatch, so it doesn't take any sort of phone calls or anything like that. If a fire gets reported, said resources launch in that form and fashion.
Yeah, I think the other thing to add on that too is, you know, field typing of what kind of resources are going to be engaged in this suppression activity, right? Where the fire may be located. So we have other resources that we could take advantage of, you know, like smoke jumpers. If we're out in a roadless area, a wilderness area, we have opportunity to order smoke jumpers, repellers to be able to take action on those incidents. So it kind of depends on what kind of field type that you're in, maybe how many fires are generated at that time, if it's a thunderstorm or we're having issues with human-caused incidents. So there's a lot of engagement that we got to think about from our levels. How do we approach that? What kind of decisions do we got to make if there's multiple starts happening? What is our priorities then, right? So we start getting back into our values at risk, which may be residential areas, and then we kind of move on from there, you know, from residential and going out. And it's not like, it has happened in Warm Springs. I think in 1999 we had 119 starts that happened in about 2-hour period from dry lightning. You know, so it came back to, okay, from a management standpoint, how do we attack this strategically? We're looking at the 30,000 foot level, and what is our priorities, right? So it comes back to human life. And then anything on the outside of that, you know, 10 miles out, 50 miles out, that wasn't priority for us. Human life was our number one priority. So,
You know, to keep with that, you know, we look every single day what our fuels conditions, the vegetation conditions are, you know, how dry is it outside, as well as what is the current weather that we're experiencing, but also looking out ahead and trying to get some situational awareness of what do we have coming at us in the next 7 to 14 days, and really set ourselves up for success when it comes to what resources do we need to either bring in because maybe we have an increase of fire activity that may be coming at us. We bring resources in and utilize the bigger system, which is throughout the nation. If there's a slower part of the nation, then we have a mechanism of being able to bring additional resources here to really boost capacity, and we do that very often. Just because the condition might be moderate right now, As we start to dry out, our conditions will climb fairly rapidly, and we will end up bringing resources in to have here to help support those local initial attack resources.
Yeah, I would just say to add on to that, you know, one thing that, you know, it's really just trying to acquire information when you do hear about a fire start, and depending on where the location is, that's what kind of resources you would have involved, all with those mutual aid agreements and based on fire districts. When you do get firefighters on scene, usually you'll have someone that will take command and start a risk assessment process and what's called a fire size up, and they'll try and gather all that information. Some of that information they might now know already as they're en route to the fire. Some they might be unknown, and that's what they're really trying to do, is understand what type of fire behavior they're dealing with, what the fuels are, what resources are needed, what the values at risk are, so if there's structures or properties nearby. And those values can also be things like timberland and other ecological resources as values as well. And once they get that information, then it can start escalating from there. Usually you'll have resources ordered and then start determining what type of fire that could potentially be.
And just to bounce it back to you, Kevin, so what does this look like on the urban interface? How does this impact how the county manages land?
Yeah, so in Deschutes County, we have about 4,000 acres of administrated land throughout the county. You know, a lot of that falls within fire districts, depending on the location. So there's fire districts throughout Deschutes County. You know, we're in the Bend Fire District right here. Just outside of Bend is the Rural 2 Fire District. City of Redmond is Redmond Fire District, and so on. So there's different fire districts. We operationally do not have resources, so we're just dependent on whatever fire district that's in. And so generally it'll be, you know, one of those city structure fire districts that will be responding. But usually it's going to be a law enforcement officer or a sheriff's officer that's first on scene, and they'll start trying to make those calls and try and organize. You know, most of the time it will be some kind of mutual aid agreement, because it will be threatening other resources. You know, so the Oregon Department of Forestry or COFMIS or Bureau of Land Management would be involved as well. And then, you know, it could be a command, a central command, or a unified command, depending on what the values are, you know, what's at risk. So, you know, it really gets, like they said, you know, it gets to where all the trucks are going to go, and they kind of sort out what's the command structure kind of after, based on what the values are.
Great lead into, and I believe we've already kind of touched on this, but I think it's still important to, you know, say, for Shawn or James, what is the Central Oregon Way?
Well, it seems pretty simple, right? In terms of the Central Oregon Way, it's just a term we use in terms of describing how we operate in Central Oregon. You know, there's 17 different cooperating fire agreements from the, well, maybe even more by now, but from the Columbia River down to south of Crescent, and then as far east as Prairie City. From the Cascade Crest. So quite a large landscape there. And within that area, all the cooperating partners work together. We speak for each other in events like this. So if ODF isn't represented, they know we have their best interest. And if we're not represented, they have our best interest. And so we work forward, we share fires, we share you know, complexities and partners. And all the partners generally touch each other in terms of those interactions. So relationships in Central Oregon are quite unique and outstanding in terms of you really don't see this type of relationships that are built in other areas of the country. A lot of places, like I mentioned, the jurisdiction is much larger in terms of large land blocks where they work on the peripheries with folks, and here we're completely intermixed and scattered, so it really requires us to work together and look to to have positive relationships. So we termed it the Central Oregon Way, and that's just how we operate.
I guess I'll tag onto that. Daily operation and communication, we all together talk and build relationships, frequently, and we have a delegation of authority that our incident commanders operate off of, and some successes when you look at the Central Oregon Way is that not looking at a specific agency, but looking at how do you provide delegation or some guidance to that initial attack incident commander, and so they're not confused and where they're at on the landscape. They're getting direction from all land management agencies that are signatory to that, and in Central Oregon, we're all a part of that one document for everybody on the ground that responds.
I think just to add a little bit more to that too. So you all heard the acronym COFMIS, or Central Oregon Fire Management Service. So Shawn recently and I were both hired into the what we're calling is the two chief model. So there's two fire chiefs here, one BLM, myself, and one Forest Service. But up until January, we actually worked for one fire chief. And we are governed under the body of all the agency administrators in Central Oregon. So the Deschutes National Forest, the Ochco National Forest, Crooked River National Grasslands, and then the Prineville District BLM. Those agency administrators all work together collectively to manage the fire program. And so it is a unique, what we call a service first model in Central Oregon, where we work together to manage all things fire suppression. There's not a decision that gets made without our input together, and our resources work together hand in hand and managing each other's jurisdiction holistically. So a Forest Service fire management officer, say out of Sisters, has BLM ground that they respond to, grasslands ground, the Deschutes National Forest. They work hand in hand with Trey, and then work hand in hand with the state. And so this type of fire organization isn't set up really anywhere else in the country, minus there's a place in Colorado, Grand Junction, has kind of a similar model, but the rest of the other locations are all single jurisdiction. So that's part of that Central Oregon Way as well.
We can start with Shawn or James, but in all honesty, this could be answered by anyone. So how are new technologies improving how you respond and manage fires?
Well, I would say that we're using a lot of technology up front. There's some great groups being put together that put products like the risk management dashboard, we call it the RMA dashboard, and we're using those tools to help understand what values, what are those things that may impact where we need to engage on the fire. We have a fire planner here in Central Oregon that dives into a lot of statistics that helps provide us clarity and understanding using past and present fire statistics to look at what resources are needed within a certain maybe block or a certain area of our response zones. Any more to that?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of, a lot of times when we don't see aircraft flying, folks generally of the general public don't think we're out there, right? We heard that, where's that heavy air tanker, et cetera. There's quite a bit of the Deschutes National Forest that's burned in terms of, it's had fire in it. It's a fire adapted landscape. This area has seen fire for years. Back when, the tribal folks were out here igniting fires and managing the ground, and, Trey can speak to that. But as people have encroached, right, we've become really good at fire suppression for the last 100+ years. Things have grown, et cetera. And so we've seen a lot of catastrophic fire with the ability of not having low intensity fire on the landscape. And so, 50% of the Sisters Ranger District, Deschutes National Forest ground is burned, right? And so now there's a snag hazard out there, and a snag is a standing tree that's been burnt, and it's basically like firewood vertically. And so we get fire out in those locations and it's super hazardous to the firefighter, which is a lot of times we hear, hey, you're just letting it burn in the wilderness. Well, there's areas of the wilderness that we can get into, like Trey was talking about with smoke jumpers, repellers, et cetera, our aerial delivered firefighters. And then there's some of our areas of our wilderness areas where we just can't put firefighters because of the hazard to them. And so we have to manage those chunks of ground a bit differently because of those snag hazards, which means you can't have somebody there on the ground. You kind of have to back out and get out of that snag area to be able to do it safely because it's an aerial hazard to them.
We talk about new technology, right? That must be an Oregon State microphone. It doesn't work. Sorry about that. I had to say that. But anyway, we talk about technology, but James kind of touched on it. And at least from a tribal perspective, when we start talking about, our landscape, even to the point, we consider Central Oregon our landscape to a point is it all comes back to, if we're using drones, if we're using NASA's satellite or whatever the case may be to help us and assist us, it comes back to the knowledge of what we did historically, right? And for my ancestors who were actually managing this land by throwing fire back under the ground, that's what it gets back to, right? And so when we start looking at the proactive side of how we manage this landscape, it's not just suppression, but it's that proactive side of how do we deal with the issues at hand. It's not always been a sea of green out here, like we see. It's overstocked. We've had more open areas. We've had more where we got issues with encroachment with meadows now. So there's issues out there. We just talk about the suppression side, but on the proactive side, when we start talking about fuels treatments, I think that's very important to talk about too, is what are we doing in the front end of fire season? And I think that's something that, with your guys' support, I think we can do wonders. So.
Yeah, just to add on that with, thinking of when I started my career and some of the technology we have now, we use a lot of satellite imagery to detect fires, on a national and regional level. That really helps with planning, so, because they can detect heat, long before any human can get to that fire. There's a lot of camera imagery being used nowadays to detect fires because we can't quite staff the lookouts like we used to. Even using AI, and that technology to detect fires. Locally, we have Deschutes alerts, so we can get out information readily to folks. There's the whole unmanned aircraft system of drones, utilizing those as well, so we don't have to. We reduce the risk to firefighters to try and get some of that intelligence on the fires, and even some of the machinery now can be remotely controlled, so you don't have to have firefighters on the ground.
Well, I just hate to not make a plug, right? Trey was talking about being proactive. We see this fine gentleman out there being proactive and doing some fuels treatments. So I think maybe most folks, as engaged as you all are, have heard about the West Bend pilot project and the potential increase in smoke, right? The news has been reporting we've been burning roughly 2,000 acres this spring, which is actually, low for the whole Deschutes National Forest as a whole, but we don't normally do that on the doorsteps of Bend, right? And so that's been that increase in the social license to put more fire on the landscape to actually protect the communities. And a lot of times we hear if we do it now, we won't see the smoke during the summer. And the reality is if we do those treatments now, it'll limit the fire intensity as fire comes towards the community. It's about smoke, but it's not necessarily about smoke. With the environment that we're in, we're going to see smoky summers. I think when, like Trey mentioned, when his people were managing the land, I think summers were quite smoky year-round, or summer long, where it was low intensity, but it was smoky. And where we're at now is we're seeing that kind of western U.S. smoke or smoke from Canada coming. So we're going to see smoke every year, but the reality is if we're not treating the landscape closer to town, fires are going to keep coming towards town. And so getting a real buffer in, a line in the sand, if you will, from the general forest, and then pushing those treatments further out is really what we need to do to protect communities, knowing fire history and things of that nature. And I do want to apologize for the texting, but I'm our Central Oregon duty officer at the moment, so I have our units texting me or trying to call me on things, so I'm like, just text me if it's an emergency. So just wanted to put that disclaimer out.
As you go running out to fight a fire right now. I would also like to add too, with a lot of these technologies, that there are several interagency committees that go along with them. The one that comes to top of mind regarding the smoke detection cameras, it's a long name, so off the top of my head, I could not tell you it. But it is an interagency committee to where, similar to the Central Oregon Way, we are sharing not only our information, but they're sharing information with us, and it's not about what land it's affecting, it's about getting the resources out to go and suppress that fire as fast as possible. And perfect timing, because now we are going to move on to some questions from the audience. We have some volunteers out there with microphones, and they will come to you. They will hold the microphone while you ask your question. Please raise your hand. Let's try to keep questions brief and avoid statements so that we can get through as many questions as possible. We're going to do this for about 15 minutes. Right?
Thank you for being here, all of you. My name's Colette Blum-Meister, and I do have a question that I've never seen an answer to regarding the planes that come in and drop slurry. Is that safe for our residential areas or people in the forest that may be in an area that's too close to the fire?
Well, I'll just say it is a chemical, but really what it boils down to, the way it's made, is it's a fertilizer-based product. That being said, it doesn't put the fire out, it's a retardant, and so it actually slows fire spread and retards it from moving. So in grass and light fuel types, it could put a fire edge out. In some of our heavier vegetation, it just slows the fire spread so that we can get ground resources, firefighters in place to do work. I would say it's not gonna harm your vegetation. I've had it on me multiple times. It burns my skin, I'll just say that. So I wouldn't go playing in it, if you will. But if it's on the ground and it's, say, there as it was protecting your community, it's not going to harm you. But it is a chemical.
Stephen Hacker, City Club member. I'm interested in if, first of all, congratulations on the Central Oregon Way, that cooperative, to be saluted. I think we've learned that in transportation, environment, number of areas that we excel in. If you look 5 years out, what would your wish list be? What would you want to see that would change, improve, better, that would make your mission easier?
At least for the Confederated Tribes / BIA, and this may be the case for everybody, is a little bit more funding. Because right now, at least for us, we're dealing with recruiting and retention issues. So that comes back to, how many people are going to be responding to incidents, how many people are going to be utilizing prescribed fire. And this is an issue that is across the nation. And I know, back in DC, they are trying to come up with solutions of how that's going to occur. And to some point right now, it is happening. Not on a permanent scale, though, but I think from that standpoint is being able to get more funding. I think at least from our standpoint, we are surviving. We're able to purchase our, wants instead of needs. I think it's one of those, from a funding standpoint and a personnel capacity standpoint, I think it's very huge from our standpoint that we are struggling, and not that we're not doing successional planning or anything else with our folks that are still working there, but it's just how do we get individuals to meet industry standards when it comes to paying them.
I would say that in 5 years, my hope really is to change our workforce from being more of a transient, seasonal type workforce to a professional workforce, and those fire trucks that respond actually work year round. And we're not only supporting the efforts here in Central Oregon, but we're shipping our resources around to support the greater good. We're starting to get there, but in 5 years from now, my hope is that we can get to that point. In addition to that, I would say strategic planning when it comes to looking at Central Oregon as a landscape, and we look strategically at where do we need to be putting our money to ensure that we're putting the right fuels treatment in to protect the communities, and we're doing that collectively and through a lot of effort here in Central Oregon with a lot of people, including our leader Joe Stetler for many years. We're doing an outstanding job, but I think in 5 years from now we can continue with his effort and look strategically and place our dollar, because as that dollar shrinks, we're going to have to be very mindful on where we put it.
So I'll add in terms of the 5-year wish list. A lot of times we get pointed at in terms of the federal firefighting workforce, which we are. But communities go, where are you? Why aren't you here protecting our communities? In reality, our mission as land managers and wildland fire managers is to protect that resource, right? That's what we're there for. We're not necessarily there to full-blown protect communities, which we end up doing. And so our mission is a bit construed in terms of, is it a resource or is it protecting communities? And the reality is it's both. But it's not just us alone as federal firefighters, it's all of us as a whole. So communities need to do their part. HOAs need to do their part, right? States, feds, we all need to be working together to tackle the challenges ahead of us. And so really it's that awareness of being able to live with fire, knowing that you're in a fire-adapted ecosystem. Fire is actually a good thing for us. It's like cleaning your house, right? If you live in a house that's cluttered, some people like it, some people don't. But the reality is if a firefighter is going to go in there and it's super cluttered, they may not be able to find you on the ground if you need to be rescued. And if your house is clean, you go in, you can find that individual quickly. And it's same with the forest. And so we need fire back on the landscape at record levels if we're going to get out of the crisis that we're in. And really, we need that done with all of you as part of being proponents, social licensing, training new people that come into our community. When I worked in Sisters, and that's where I live, but I'd make the joke of every 2 to 3 years I have to train somebody new or continue to teach that message, right, of like being pro-fire. Fire is a good thing here as people move into Central Oregon because they're moving in at record rates, right? And if there's a large fire on the landscape, people get it. And if we miss that cycle of having a large fire, unfortunately, people forget. Our attention span is so short that we need to constantly be educating folks of where they're moving, why they live here, and what really is going to keep people safe. And it's putting more fire on the landscape, doing more fuels treatments, and being stewards of the land and good community members to protect everybody.
Yeah, I would just add on to that, our main goal, all of us really, is to have fire-adapted communities. So, our federal partners are working on the landscape treatments on federal ground. We've had a lot of prescribed fire this spring that was part of that, that went really well. And, one of my missions is to work with our non-federal partners, our private landowners, to make sure that their communities are fire-adapted. And so that combination of having fuel treatments and good defensible space within your communities and adjacent landscape treatments is what makes your area fire adapted. So all working together. We do a pretty good job of that in Central Oregon. We have a lot of Firewise sites and have pretty good grant programs, but we can always do better. And probably the biggest thing that I'd like to see is just a higher compliance within the community of defensible space. So it's not just a handful of folks in your community, it's everyone in your community, making sure that their structure's sound, because that makes all our firefighters' jobs easier. If they know that community is defensible and adapted, they don't have to put as much effort and resources, and they can focus on other things.
To just bounce off of everything y'all have said, on my 5-year wish list would also be that everybody in Oregon partakes in wildfire prevention. It is not something that is just for the fire managers. In Oregon, over 70% of our fires are human caused, and specifically on ODF protected lands, that last year that number was over 80%. So with the number one cause being debris burning, the second cause being equipment use, which varies from lawnmowers to vehicles, and then the third being campfires. So by just taking a couple of extra steps, by making sure a fire is completely out and cold to the touch, we all can kind of do our part in preventing the next large wildfire.
Hi. Follow-up question to what Kevin had mentioned about fuel treatments. I actually want to know how you guys assess and decide on which areas require the treatments.
There's a lot of risk assessments out there. You essentially, areas in the urban interface are going to be our high priority areas adjacent to wildland fuels. So, we have the national forest adjacent to us, right outside our doorstep here. And so all those communities that are adjacent to those wildland urban interface areas is probably the top priority. The concept of wildland urban interface, it's not necessarily a location, it's a condition. So if you have wildland fuels, bitterbrush, ponderosa pine, in your community, you're just as susceptible to fire as anyone else. So, we do prioritize areas that are adjacent to large landscapes, but we try and emphasize that concept of defensible space, home ignition zones you can apply that to any community anywhere in the United States and beyond. We've seen that in certain incidents that places that we didn't necessarily thought would be susceptible to fire have in the near future. So, there are some risk assessments that we utilize, but we also, we and other, some of my partners will go out and work with these communities and come up with risk assessments for the communities itself. But it always applies right at your home. Start at your home first and work outwards. And we're more worried about the common areas. Make sure that your home is sound with defensible space before you worry about areas or your neighbor or things like that.
I guess I would say, our community wildfire protection plans that we have here in Central Oregon is super important, and keeping those up to date and ensuring that those groups that are putting those together have an approach that it's maybe not looking at that individual home, but it's looking at how do we protect this community, and really utilizing those to help us as federal employees with our strategic planning on where we go with our fuels treatments as well. And so we're in alignment. And I think if, like I said, in 5 years, my hope is that we can be in alignment and continue to be in alignment and grow our community protection plans in Central Oregon. And then with that, I think there's avenues for money that could be available to help ensure that we're put in the right spot.
From a tribal standpoint, we look at all of that when you start talking about defensible space. That's high priority for us. But at least from a tribal standpoint, we have what we call first foods. And we have foods within the landscape that we go out and utilize, right? So it's not only conditions, but sometimes it's with some of the families that are traditional, right? We'll go out there and do some fuels treatments or put prescribed fire on the ground to enhance those foods. And I think for us, it's learning how to use science and culture and how do you blend that together, right? So I think that's very important to understand, from our range to our high desert to our timbered areas. You know, so we utilize, from a science standpoint, a risk map, or for a potential map, and how we identify some of these areas of high fuel loads, dense areas, you know. So I think from a Warren Springs standpoint, we did a really good job from a community standpoint and doing fuels treatments around our communities all throughout the reservation. So we have the opportunity to kind of expand outside of that. So, you know, we can go 10 miles, 50 miles away from communities now and do fuels treatments. I think that's something very important from our standpoint is, you know, we took our priorities, which was human life, and now we're out there. And, you know, our belief is what the Creator has given us, that's what we got to take care of, right? And that's what we're doing right now. So.
All right, we're now going to do our last question.
Hello? Okay. Hi. So I heard, like you guys were saying, that a lot of the issues with the wildfires right now is buildup of like brush and dead wood and all that kind of stuff going on. And I think somebody up there said you're doing about 2,000 acres of prescribed burns this year, but you said we need record levels to fight the problem. So what's an exact number that you think we need to get to not become California?
I really can't give you an exact number, and the 2,000 acres, right? That's the particular West Bend project. That's where they burnt 2,000 acres this spring. There was other acreage done across Central Oregon as a whole, as well as with Warm Springs, right? You know, we need to get fire back in our fire-adapted ecosystems. That's just the fact of the matter. You know, when we first started fire suppression, and you know, when the Forest Service was the inception of it, you know, 1905, and we had the big burn in 1910 in, you know, Montana, Idaho, and then in 2020, right? We had the fires over on the west side of Oregon that burnt towns. We're seeing fires at that magnitude where we haven't seen before, right? Fire it follows a cycle. So there's a fire return interval is what we call it. And depending on the fuel type is when fire would be back on that landscape naturally at a particular interval. So our ponderosa pine, which the environment we live in, is anywhere from 3 to 12 years. A fire would ignite in that area and clean that area up. You get down into the mixed conifer, you know, our lodgepole, and over on the west side, the fire return interval is about 125 years. So if you take 1910 and you run it out, we're right about that same level where we saw those catastrophic fires. And so it's a fire return interval, and we got to get back in front of that with the landscapes and ecosystems that we manage and that we live in. So exact number, I can't give you an exact number, but we're not even scratching the surface. I'll just say that.
Yeah, you know, we do more than just prescribed fire, right? We've got a lot of mechanical treatments. So we're just within, you know, the West Bend, a couple thousand acres, but, you know, we're treating roughly 70,000 acres of land out there on the Deschutes National Forest, and that's success. And that success is really contributed because really all the work that has been done in previous years, we're going back in and now we're retreating some of those acres that actually need retreatment. So we're looking at it, you know, where are we going next and what's the new thing? But we also have that, what are we doing with the land that we've treated years ago and cycling back into retreating those. And so, you know, I look at Aubrey Hall and, you know, the devastation that fire did years ago. And now we've got, you know, homes jammed up and communities jammed up within that, right? And so we're just, you know, moving closer, but also our veg treatments are moving closer as well. And we're doing our best to ensure that we're putting our efforts into that. But we can't lose focus of all the really good work that has been happening over the last 20 plus years here as well.
and I get, just to add into what Shawn was talking about, right? So our mechanical treatments, those veg treatments that we're doing is trying to mimic that fire return interval in terms of cleaning that thing up or getting the underbrush cleared out. And so that's really the whole thought process and the science behind it. Knowing that we can't smoke communities out day in and day out, right? But we got to look for those right things to do where we can. The mechanical piece isn't an absolute fix. You know, fire actually regenerates and puts nutrients back into the soil, et cetera, and et cetera. So it's a good fix, but it's not the end-all be-all.
Yeah, I could probably put a few metrics to that. So essentially the West Bend project is a 30,000 acre area just west of Bend that's, you know, been slated for doing fuels treatments, high priority for reducing fire risk. You know, historically, it's been difficult to conduct prescribed fire in that area because of all the smoke that goes into town and getting the social license to do that. This has been the first year and why they're calling it the West Bend pilot study, where they involved the EPA and the DEQ and some other folks to really integrate on that smoke management and try and mitigate for it. And so really, you know, providing a lot of public outreach on why we're doing what we're doing and the reasons. And you know, so 30,000 acres, historically, they were only treating about 300 acres a year on that. And to keep up with the fire return interval, you should be treating about 3,000. So this year, they treated almost 2,000 acres, so getting a lot closer to what they should be treating. But, you know, that's kind of the path we need to head is that you're going to probably have to deal with a little bit of smoke in the spring to try and offset some of that potential smoke in the summer. And, you know, there's essentially a whole suite of treatments. You know, you have thinning, pre-commercial thinning, maybe some brush removal, and kind of the final piece to that maintenance cycle, especially around here, is prescribed fire. That really is what hardens that landscape and prevents catastrophic fires from happening. There's been a fair amount of evidence from the Bootleg fire and the Caldera fire to show that. So I think we're on a good path, but, you know, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, just to add on that too, I think we're taking a different perspective on the proactive side of fuels treatments. You know, historically, we were looking at maybe 500 acre blocks, right, of doing fuels treatments. I think we're doing. Okay. We're looking at large landscape-based fuels treatments, you know, 10,000 acres, 15,000 acres. We're looking at watershed-type treatment area now, and we understand that's what we got to get back into, is not this 500 acre blocks, 100 acre blocks, but 10,000 acre treatment areas, 15,000 acre treatment areas. And I think that's something very important that we got to look at, you know, full stands of trees, and let alone we can't overlook our range areas, the high desert areas, and what conditions those are in also. And how do we enhance our range area also, not just our timbered area?
Well, thank you to everybody on the panel and to everybody in attendance for a great conversation. I would now like to introduce Kim Gammond, Executive Director of the City Club of Central Oregon, to conclude our program.
Thank you. Thank you to Jessica, James, Kevin, Trey, and Shawn for leading us in conversation today, and especially at a very busy time of year for them. And thank you to our planning team and the bulletin for the articles that came out this past Sunday. Our next forum will be August 15th, Shiny Happy People, the Paradoxes of Living in Central Oregon. Membership registration for that is now open, and we will be taking July off from programming, but keep an eye out for some communications for us over the next month about a community survey, some volunteer opportunities, board opportunities, and then for our members, you will get to vote next month from some options for our November forum topic. We are currently seeking volunteers for our program, marketing, and public relations, membership and sponsorship, as well as board nominations. So if you're interested in any of that, visit our website, talk to me or any of our volunteers. As City Club faces the challenges that many nonprofits do, we are seeking deeper financial support from this community. So please keep us in mind when you think about memberships, sponsorships, donations this year. And again, you're always welcome to talk to me or a board member. Thank you so much for being here today. Have a wonderful afternoon.